Hello and welcome to Cymera, Britain's only book festival celebrating science fiction, fantasy and horror writing. My name is Anne Landman and I'm the festival's founder and artistic director. Right about now, I'd hope to be welcoming you to beautiful Edinburgh, to our venue The Pleasance, for a weekend packed with events. Writing workshop, panels, readings, open mics, a quiz, a ceilidh, 2 plays. We had so much in store for you. Thank you for joining us online instead, to be part of our programme from the safety of your homes. We're very excited to still bring you a fantastic lineup of speakers. We'd ask you that you support our speakers, and there's many ways you can do that. You can buy their books or borrow them from the library. You can donate to them directly via their Patreon or Ko-fi. You will find the links for that below in the description. We encourage you to buy a ticket for our events, even the pre-recorded ones. All ticket money will go directly to our speakers. You can also donate to the festival, and all donations via the donation page will be split between our speakers, once we've covered our costs like the Zoom account. Thank you again for joining us in this brave new world of digital events. We hope you have a chance to check out all 33 of ours over the weekend. Please let us know what you think of them. Do get in touch via social media, the chat function in Zoom, or drop us an email on info@chimerafestival.co.uk. We'd love to hear from you. We hope you have a fantastic weekend, and we look forward to seeing you in person next year for Cymera 2021.
Hello and welcome to Cymera 2020 and Heroic Tales in Times Past with Trudi Tweedie and Nicholas Bowling. My name is Linda Strachan and I am delighted to be chatting to two fantastic authors today whose compelling tales, The True Heart by Trudi Tweedie and In the Shadows of Heroes by Nicholas Bowling. And these will take us back to the past, to Elizabethan Scotland and to the Roman Empire to explore their heroic tales. So I'll tell you just a little bit about our two lovely authors. Trudi Tweedie studied economics at Manchester before ending up in Edinburgh, researching beer for Heineken. Who knows where life will take us? Great stuff. She now lives in beautiful Aberdeenshire with her husband and 2 children. And The Pure Heart was published by Chicken House and is an accomplished debut novel that won the 2018 Times Chicken House Children's Fiction Competition. And it's Gothic horror. I probably should have read that bit before I started reading it because there's a sense of creeping dread as you read through it. And Trudi doesn't shrink from giving the story a rather unexpected and unsettling ending. It's been described as a deliciously chilling Elizabethan tale with an injection of horror. And Nicholas Bowling is multi-talented, an author, a stand-up comic, musician. He comes from London and graduated from Oxford University with a BA in Classics and a Master's in Greek and Latin language and literature before becoming a Latin teacher. His debut novel, Witchborn, I think here, there we have it, which is a dark and twisty Elizabethan fantasy, was published by Chicken House, and his second novel, which we will be talking about today, In the Shadow of Heroes, has been described as myth, fate, and heroism in a spellbinding classical setting. It is a thrilling adventure and quest that combines Greek mythology and hidden secrets into a very compelling story. So, hello, Trudi and Nick, and welcome to Cymera 2020.
Hi there.
Hi.
I didn't realise you were a stand-up comic, which kind of explains how good you are at this.
Let me just put this to bed. That the stand-up comedy thing has dogged me for about 8 years, and I should probably kind of go around to various people and tell them to remove it from their websites. I did used to do a bit of stand-up, and I did the Edinburgh Festival in like 2013.
Wow.
and then stopped. So I haven't really done any for like 7 years, but it tends to be the first thing that anyone mentions when they look at my biography.
It's not a bad thing. It's not a bad thing to have there. So it's lovely to have you both here today, and I'll maybe start with Trudi, if that's okay, and ask you to give us an introduction to The Pure Heart, maybe a little bit about the story for those who haven't actually read it yet.
Okay, so this is A Pure Heart. It's got some labels in for my readings, so I don't lose my page. So The Pure Heart is my debut novel, although the debut that's been published. It won the Times Chicken House competition, much to my absolute shock and surprise, in 2018. And the competition is almost like the X factor of publishing. You go from not being able to get published, not being able to get an agent, to suddenly having all of that lined up for you. So I've had a steep learning curve in the publishing world for the past few years. But it wasn't my first novel. I've been writing for about 20 years just for pleasure, you know. So I think there is no such thing as an overnight success. You know, people have been plugging away for a long time. Originally, this book started as another book, and I ended up writing this as a prequel, which actually took on a life of its own. It's about a girl growing up on the islands of St Kilda, which really surprises me that a lot of people don't know where St Kilda is. It's part of the British Isles. It's the furthest, you could argue, the furthest outpost of the British Isles. It's uninhabited now. It was evacuated in the 1930s, when life there just became so hard that the inhabitants eventually evacuated. And this is set in the 16th century, when isolation there would have been even greater. It's about a girl who is taken away, let's say under false pretenses, from the island to work for a merchant in the Scottish borders. What's quite strange is this merchant isn't from the local area. He is from Italy, as are all of his household, his servants, his daughter. Isabel has been, please do forgive my Gaelic pronunciation. I am not a Gaelic speaker. It just has Gaelic words in it. So she is taken away from the island. She hopes to return to the island, having gained experience in the borders, but she soon finds that the house in the borders is not what it is said that it is, not what the merchant has said it is. There's lots of secrets about the house and about the merchant, and especially about his creepy daughter Maria. And we're left wondering whether Isabel will ever get home to St Kilda.
That's lovely, yes. It is definitely, there's lots of twists and turns and secrets, and yes, Maria is quite creepy altogether. Would you like to read us a short extract from it? Thank you.
Sure. So I am going to read a bit from before she has left the island, but she has just found out that she's going to be the chosen girl, because they have to select a girl. She's going to be the chosen girl, and she is preparing to leave. But Mommy just slapped my hand away quickly, packing the trunk as if to get it over with. Dried puffin, rough bread, a spare smock, a black and white hide from the finest soy sheep, shoes sewn from a pair of gannets, and even more randomly, an animal skull bleached buff white by the sun, salt, and sea. I guess in the end she decided that I needed things that would remind me of this place, things that would one day bring me back. It was Innes who escorted me from the Black House, linking my arm firmly as we walked down to the shore. Everyone I had ever known was waiting for me there, my whole entire world standing on that narrow strip of creamy sand. I had lingered last in the Black House, committing every inch of my modest home to memory. I give my word that our Artair will not be married for 1 year to the day, said Innes. Please, Ishbel, try and make it back safely before then. I nodded my head. Innes Ferguson was famed for being a man of his word. And if this merchant was too, but then by the time September came again, I would be back on home soil, armed with valuable experience of the outside world. Still, my stomach knotted at the sight of the gathering on the shore, the crowd forming a horseshoe at the water's edge around the boat. "I must tell you," said Innes watchfully, "we are not sending you for the promise of supplies." "Then why?" I asked, bewildered. We were near enough the crowd now to see that most would not meet my gaze. I spotted Artair standing by my sister, near to the boat, but had lost sight of Mummy. "For what other reason are you sending me?" "It's a strange sailor," began Innes. "The men are afraid of him." "What harm to us could one man be?" My sister's words when the boat sailed into the bay came back to haunt me. I stopped and looked up at the chief for an explanation. "Last night, we heard cries coming from the boat," he said. "Noises that were not human." "Not human," I repeated, thinking of the sounds I could not explain, the ones that had caused ghosts to circle me protectively. I could not let on that I had heard them too. "Whatever do you mean?" "We want the sailor to leave our shores as soon as possible," said the chief, taking my arm again and urging me on. "We need to fulfill that letter's request. Otherwise, more of his kind may come." "What do you mean, more of his kind?"
Thank you.
Thank you.
This is where the audience would normally clap you. So, no, that was lovely. Yes, it definitely poses so many questions, and yeah, it's really exciting. Thank you. Nick, do you think you would like to give us a bit of a flavour of In the Shadow of Heroes?
Sure. I mean, it's basically Indiana Jones set in Rome. that's my elevator pitch. Yeah, it's about a slave called Cadmus, who is 14 years old, and he is the ward of, well, he's not the ward of, he's owned by a scholar called Tullus. And one evening, the lackeys of the Emperor Nero turn up at Cadmus's house with a box containing something mysterious and a sort of offer of work, an offer to go on an expedition for his master. And it transpires that essentially the Emperor Nero is obsessed with the relics and the artifacts of mythology, and his current obsession is to go looking for the Golden Fleece. And Cadmus, once his master gets abducted, essentially, because he is the most sort of knowledgeable person about these sorts of things, and then Cadmus goes to find him, ends up getting embroiled in the expedition and in the mystery, and adventure ensues.
That's lovely. Yes, thank you. That gives us a real sort of introduction into it. I love your depiction of Nero, actually, by the way. I think he's...
Thanks. Yeah, I mean, not necessarily entirely historically accurate, but yeah.
But, you know, it's fiction. It's even it's historical.
Yeah, I mean, yeah, I think I sort of play pretty fast and loose with the kind of stereotype. I think basically I sort of take the image that probably later Romans would have had of him, given what the sort of sources say about him, and play with that basically.
That's lovely. Would you like to read us a short extract?
Yeah. Well, I'll just read the prologue if that's all right.
That's fine.
So this is taking place in 66 AD, I think it is. Or, yeah, 66. The girl was like a visitor from the world below. Even if Sylvanus had been able to stand, she still would have been a head taller than him. From where he lay, spread out on the couch and delirious with fever, she seemed inhumanly large, dark, insubstantial. Pluto himself come to take Sylvanus away. He motioned to his slave to bring him a little water, then dismissed him. With difficulty, he propped himself up on one elbow and beckoned the girl into the room. She approached the couch in 2 giant strides, bringing with her a clean smell of dust and hot air from outside. Healthy visitors only reminded Sylvanus of how sick he was. His room was damp and fetid. The plaster on the walls seemed to sweat as much as he did. You speak Latin? He asked. The girl stared at him and didn't reply. That was good. It meant she wouldn't be able to read what she was delivering. Greek? He said. She nodded slowly. You want to get out of this place, don't you? Her face remained expressionless, as though weighing up whether this might be some sort of a trap. Then she nodded again. Well then, said Sylvanus, I have a job for you. He hauled himself upright, his body sagging like a sack of grain. He waited for the throbbing in his temples to subside, and then made his way to a strong box in the corner of the room. 3 times he stumbled and fell. 3 times the girl made no move to help him, but simply stood by the couch, watching with curiosity. Sylvanus opened the book and took out a scroll and a wax tablet. He put the scroll on the desk and handed the tablet to the girl. I've watched you, he said, with the other slaves. You seem, he groped for the word, resilient. Still she said nothing. I want you to look after this tablet with the same vigor that you look after yourself. Do you understand? Its contents are very important, more important than I can tell you. He was starting to look bored now. Listen! Sylvanus tried to shake her by the arm, but found himself clutching onto her to stop himself from falling. He coughed, tasted blood in the back of his mouth. Listen to me. You must take this to a man in Rome. His name is written inside. Go to the harbour, get a boat to Italy, as quickly as possible, by any means possible. No one else is to read it. His slave trotted back into the room behind them both, holding a circle of iron in his hands. You'll have to wear this, I'm afraid. I can't afford to have the message going astray. Sylvanus took the collar from the boy and fumbled with the clasp. He fitted it around the girl's neck. A wooden tag hung by a chain onto her chest, which read in Latin, I belong to Gaius Domitius Tullus, senator. If you find me, return me to my master at Rome. Sylvanus could see that the collar was too tight around the girl's muscular neck, and her brow twitched with discomfort. Go, he said. Don't rest. The man in Rome will look after you, I promise. He nodded to his slave, who led her out of the room, taking 3 steps for every one of hers. She never said a thing, and she never looked back. Sylvanus watched them go and wondered through the fog of his sickness if he was making a terrible mistake. Perhaps he thought it would be better if all he knew went with him to his grave. He swayed a little on his feet. He rolled up the edge of his toga and looked at the 2 tiny puncture wounds on his thigh. The flesh around them had gone a sickening shade of yellow, threaded through with dark purple veins. No doctor in all of Athens had been able to do anything for him. Now he was resigned to prayer, and he very much doubted the gods wanted to listen to him. Behind him, the scroll that he had taken from the strongbox was still lying on the writing desk. He picked it up and held it for a moment, enjoying its weight, tracing his finger around the bosses at the top and the bottom. Then he took the oil lamp from the tabletop, held it to the corner of the scroll, and set fire to it. He dropped it onto the tiles and watched the tightly rolled papyrus burn and blacken and flutter like a crow's feathers. His eyes watered from the smoke. He may have been crying, though he hardly had the energy for it. Either way, it was done. Now it was all down to the girl. Outside, he could hear the streets of Athens singing and clattering with life. Sylvanus smiled. He'd hated the noise when he'd arrived, strange men hollering in strange accents. And now, on the brink of death, it sounded like music. He crushed the remains of the scroll with his heel. Then he stumbled back to the couch, pulled the coverlet over his body, and waited for night.
Excellent, thank you. That was great. Like a little bow there. I absolutely love the sense of place in both of these novels. You really get a feeling for being with the characters in these particular places, the details and the atmosphere. Nick, I was going to say I really enjoyed being in ancient Rome there with In the Shadows of Heroes. So can you say what it was about, particularly, I mean, obviously the time fits the storyline, but what was it that made you want to write something about that kind of heroic story?
So I think it wasn't, like you say, the story came first, really. I wanted to write something about myth, particularly. And I've always been quite interested in the sort of retelling of myths. And I'm particularly interested also in how Romans retold myths, because actually there wasn't, whilst there's a sort of canon of kind of Greek myths and Greek stories, they were very happy to kind of play quite fast and loose with them, and to rework them and tell different versions of them and subvert them and ironize them. So that's something that interested me. And then I also, every time I do an interview, I talk about Patrick Rothfuss and The Name of the Wind, which was one of my favorite books of all time. But I really like the way that he sort of deconstructs myths, or looks at where a myth has come from, and how where the seed of the myth came from, and how that has ended up being spun into the story. So basically, I wanted to look at sort of Greek myths that sort of people think they know, and offer a sort of different spin on it, which I guess was also the same with Witchborn as well, actually. Does it take a period of time that people think they know very well from sort of primary school history classes, and then say, well, what if it happens slightly differently?
I think that kind of thing always, you know, it brings a whole, not only a whole new dimension to myths that we know, as you say, but it brings an added, you know, a sense of being in it in a completely different way. It's a lovely storytelling. It's a lovely way to tell stories.
Yeah, I mean, I think that there's a real frisson when you recognize something from a story that you already know, and then something sort of different happens to it. The sense of sort of, I really like that sense of kind of unearthing something that has been lost. Like I really like all the bits in, all my favorite bits of sort of Lord of the Rings is where they find bits of the old world that have been that kind of noble ruin sort of thing. So it was the kind of mythology that attracted me, I suppose, more than the setting. Yeah. More sort of mundanely, I also just wanted to write a book in a really nice climate.
We'll come to your research in a minute, actually, because we'll talk about that. It's always a great opportunity for a writer to do something like that. So Trudi, can you tell us a bit about what drew you to set the Pure Heart in Elizabethan Scotland in particular? You know, is it a story you could have set elsewhere, and perhaps also why it was the borders of Scotland?
Yeah, I mean, I'm not a planner at all, so everything just kind of came about piecemeal. Initially, I had written a different book, and then this was like the prequel to it, because I found my characters were not strong. In fact, when I read that book, it's really not great. So I thought, how far back am I going to go? I love Elizabethan times. I'm not a historian. In fact, I got chucked out of history when I was about 12, 13, for being 2 centuries behind everybody else. But I love history, and it's one of my biggest regrets, actually, because as an adult, I very much love history. I volunteer for the National Trust in Scotland, which means you get to go into the castles and actually touch stuff, which is like the best thing. But in terms of St Kilda, always been fascinated by St Kilda. Those black and white pictures of the villagers sat on what was their main street, which are actually quite modern. They tend from the beginning of last century. Hardly anything is known about St Kilda before 200 years ago, because hardly anybody went there until the Victorians. So I've always been fascinated by it, and it is a National Trust site as well, both for its natural beauty and its history. And it's just so isolated. So a few years ago, we went to the Outer Hebrides on holiday, and I just remember looking out from the west coast of the Isle of Lewis, and Lewis itself is very, very remote. And then you look out from there over at the Atlantic, which isn't like the North Sea. The North Sea is kind of quite flat. The Atlantic is kind of mental, you know, and I don't like the sea particularly. And I just thought, imagine living on a rock, basically, it's a volcanic rock, in the 16th century, what it would be like to be then taken away into somewhere else. Now, originally, the merchant house wasn't in the Borders, it was in Northern England, but the Borders started to fit better because it's almost like a different realm. It didn't belong to any country. The border moved up and down depending on who won the battles of the day. The borderlands were a law unto themselves. You know, they didn't really follow the laws. And then because of in the 16th century, with everything that was happening with Catholicism and Protestantism, again, it was a bit of a no man's land in terms of that as well. So in the end, that seemed like the right location for the merchant's house and not Northern England. So that's really why the location moved there.
Excellent. Yeah, it is interesting, that thing about the Borders being neither one place nor the other, but a bit sort of
like that in the Borders. It still feels like that. A lot of towns I do identify more with being in Scotland than in England. You know, it's a real kind of mismatch there. So, and
you have that almost sense of that they were able to isolate themselves there as well and create their own little sort of place that people kept away from, which gives that as well. And the name Plustrel, I think I
did, yes. So Alexander Plustrel. I mean, I shamelessly stole my names from everywhere, basically. So Alexander Plustrel. Sorry. I have actually put them all down here because he was a real person in the 15th century, living in Cheapside in London. He was very limited. I just came across him on Google. He was an Italian immigrant who was suffering persecution for being an immigrant. They wanted him out of the street or something. And I just thought it was quite a relevant story for today as well, in terms of immigration and stuff like that, and people being persecuted. And the name just stuck with me because it does sound Italian without being over Italian. So I just stole the name. So he was actually a real person. So that's where the name came from.
In the tradition of all the best writers, steal where you can and ship in quietly.
I often steal from graveyards, and I steal names from graveyards, but none of my names actually in the pure heart are from graveyards. But Alexander Plustrel was actually a real person.
Ah, that's interesting. You mentioned, Nick, about obviously the setting the story came first and the setting was obvious from that. I'd like to ask you both whether the characters or the actual plot of the story came first, or was that sort of developmental?
I think they sort of came together. I think it was just that initial. I'd probably say not the plot, but that main idea, the idea of rewriting a myth, I think came first. And then I think pretty quickly I knew that it would need some sort of the main character would need to be some kind of an academic, someone who's more sort of brains than brawn, who gets embroiled in something who gets into something over his head, essentially. But no, the characters actually changed quite a bit in the writing. Actually, it wasn't like they actually no. So Tog, who I think maybe we'll talk about later. So Tog is the girl who sort of is unnamed in that prologue bit, who's the daughter of a British chieftain. And also a slave, but she arrived just sort of fully formed, which very rarely happens actually with me. But she just sort of turned up, and I kind of knew exactly how she spoke and what she said. So.
I think it's always fascinating when that happens, and
weird, isn't it?
Character sort of appears. People who don't write often think we're kind of making that up, but it does.
Yeah, they do have sort of minds of their own.
Yeah, which is great. Trudi, what do you?
Yeah, my characters did change. Isabel had to become a bit more action orientated. That was really at the request of the publisher because of the audience that I was writing for. The merchant, Alexander, very much appeared. He just appeared. Although he, again, was initially a little bit of he was a bit more of an, he was a bit more of a colourful character in the original version, and I did actually have to tone him down. But he was very much the person I really enjoyed writing, the character that I really enjoyed. I had a lot of fun with Maria as well. Maria, I think her character developed more than the others. But yeah, I think I started with the place and the situation, and I think the characters came later.
Just came into it.
Yeah.
Exciting. Well, about the kind of research you did for these books, Trudi, your book refers to the plague at a time when, at the moment, contagious illness is very much on everybody's minds. So I wondered what kind of research you did about the plague and the potential cures for it, and the extremes people went to try and cure it.
Yeah, I again always been kind of interested in the plague, and despite my history kind of eviction at school, I always loved history, and we didn't have many books growing up. But my mum had bought me one year the history of Great Britain, and it was about this thick, and it had some horrible drawings in it. It was all drawing, but there was some really horrible stuff in there. And the page on the play was awful. It had bring out your dead and all that kind of stuff. And so I've always kind of been quite fascinated with it. And then living in Edinburgh and going to see all of the historical stuff there and the plague mask and all of that kind of stuff. So always been interested in that period of time, really. So that's really come right the way back from childhood.
And Nick, I know you've studied classics and teach Latin, and so this is obviously very much situated in your field as such. But can you tell us about any specific research you did for this book? I mean, did you get to go and
not really. I just ploughed into the story. That was the same with Witchborn as well. I just kind of went ahead in quite a sort of blasé fashion, and then afterwards, picked through it to look for any real kind of historical clangers. And even very, very late in the day, I was finding things that almost undid the entire plot. So I don't want anyone to be under the misapprehension that I sort of spent weeks months in the library beforehand, before setting pen to paper. I just went for it, for better or worse. But I did for my master's. I did a dissertation on Neronian Rome and Neronian literature. So that was all sort of there. So I kind of had a good background, just a good place to start from. I wasn't just sort of.
So have you been to visit some of the ancient Roman and Greek sites?
I haven't been back to Rome since I was 14, which is ridiculous, really. So I did a school trip to Rome, and I think at the time I was more interested in sort of buying pizza and trying to get served.
Your book certainly gives that flavour as if you've been there. So that is.
Well, thanks. Yeah. No, I have been to Florence recently. Been to Venice a couple more times. I'm glad you say that, actually, about the sort of sense of place, because I think when I was growing up, that was what I kind of looked for most. in a book. I almost feel like, I might be misremembering this, but when I was very young, I almost didn't really care what the plot was. I just wanted to be taken somewhere else. I don't know if anyone else sort of feels that, but like my abiding memories of reading kids books is just the feeling of being somewhere which was not here. And I almost can't even recall what the actual characters or the plot was. So yeah, I think I do go out of my way to try and create it. So.
Well, there were lots of details and things, and you really got that sense of being, of the warmth as well in there.
Yeah.
You said you wanted.
Thanks. Yeah. So I generally, yeah. I'd say, especially after writing Witchborn, which was kind of mired in all the sort of gloom of 16th century London, I thought I just want to write something with some really nice weather.
And Trudi, your Isabel, her feeling of her life on St Kilda, that you know, the climbing to get seabirds, and you know, that sense of that life that was very sparse and difficult.
Yes, I mean, again, a lot of it was from the internet, and you can get, like, obviously you can go on and do, like, they've got cameras and live cameras and stuff on there, so you can go and kind of try and get a feel of the place, and going to a place like the Outer Hebrides. I mean, I picked up this from a beach in the Outer Hebrides, which kind of does appear in the trunk, you know, and just things like that. I mean, I love beach finds, and just things that you can kind of have with you when you're actually writing, to kind of take you back to that kind of place. But yes, the St Kilda, I did a lot of the research online. In terms of the borders, I've never been to the borders. I've been through the borders, like, all the time. So I used to live in Edinburgh, my family from the northeast of England, up and down all the time. Seen it from the train many times, but I've never stopped in the borders, which I should do, because Tweedie, now my second name is Tweedie now, that is a border name. So I very much just imagined what the borders were like. So yeah, in terms of research, I know what Nick means by you suddenly uncover something and you think, I can't use that anymore. I've been talking about the 8-day sickness, which was something that took the babies, that killed the babies 8 days into them being born, which I thought was a terribly clever thing to put in, and sounded really, you know, great. And the book was already, you know, halfway down the production line by that point. I then found out that that didn't really happen until the 19th century with the introduction of tetanus, because they didn't actually suffer from that at all. So I just thought, I've just put that in the 16th century. I'm going to get somebody writing up, you know, and complaining. So there's quite a lot of things. But what I really found out that was fascinating was how much they did know in the 16th century, and some really surprising things, and also the education of girls. So while you know, the merchant's very much wanting to educate his daughter and educate Isabel, and that was actually a thing at the beginning of the 16th century, and then it kind of fell out of favour in terms of educating richer girls, not talking about poor girls. That kind of fell out of favour somewhat later on. So it was actually really interesting, and it is fiction, so you can put your own spin on it, but you have always got that at the back, especially because I'm not a historian. I was very much feeling like I was an imposter talking about these things. But you can suddenly find something and think, oh my goodness, that couldn't have possibly happened in that time. And then you go, oh well, crack on.
Yeah, I know.
There's something. There's a part in the Shadow of Heroes where Cadmus and Tog have to wait for the tide to come in before they can board a ship in the Mediterranean. And like you say, Trudy, the book was already basically finished in fact, it was out. It had been published because someone pointed it out. But apparently there is no tide in the Mediterranean because it's sort of sealed off. The tide is minimal. It's like a matter of inches, and you know, the entire plot hinges upon them waiting for that tide to come in. So sorry about that. Trudy, did you have any, you know, you were saying you were waiting for someone to point out all the sort of flaws. Have you had anyone sort of online, or have you had any reviews that have really torn it to pieces? I've had a couple.
I've had a few reviews that have torn it to pieces, but not for the historical aspect. I think mainly the thing that people can't get their head around, which is I think something that Linda, you're coming on to talk about, is the character being a bit passive. But actually, for the time, she was, in terms of how women were treated and their status in society, she's actually quite she's not passive. And I think that's the main criticism I've had of the book. But I think at the moment it's really gone out to that young adult audience. And I don't think I've had any kind of historians as such, certainly not feedback on it. But there's a lot of people who are enthusiasts about history and St Kilda and the Outer Hebrides, and even the Black House. So she lives in a Black House. And again, I was quite inspired when I went to the Outer Hebrides and visited a Black House, and to see how all these people lived in a very small space. However, Black houses didn't exist really until the 17th century, but nobody knew how people lived really. There's theories about what houses they had in St Kilda, but nobody knows for sure because they used all of the building materials in the new houses, so there's not really anything left behind. So I think you can have a little bit of freedom. Although I have to say the tide thing is quite a big thing.
Yeah, pretty cool.
Something I would never pick up on, but that's brilliant. That's absolutely
yeah. Never mind. I guess that get them all pulped.
If you're not, if you're not actually a historian, or even, well, I don't know. Myself, I prefer fiction to writing non-fiction, and recently had to do a fact fiction book about the Jacobites, and for middle grade, and did huge amounts of research. And the biggest fear that I had all the way through was somebody's going to turn around and say, you got that wrong, because there'll always be someone. But there are so many things that are a bit like you were saying, Trudi, about the fact that, they don't know. And in fact, I remember years ago trying to ask an expert from a museum about where pterodactyls nested. Was it in a tree or a cliff? And she said something that stuck with me. She said, well, actually, there's lots of things we don't know. It could have been either, so just go with whatever you feel like. And I think there are very grey areas, and I think we can get away with it. Some of them less so, Nick, but some things are actually grey areas. But I think as authors, it's quite difficult.
Yeah, that's sort of where the fiction comes from, isn't it? I suppose it's those areas where you're not sure and where you've got a bit of elbow room to tell your own story or tell a different kind of story.
And for most readers, they get carried away with the fiction and the story, and that's the important thing, that they are experiencing it, and things that maybe are, well, we all have things that we maybe get wrong or whatever, but I think it's really about carrying the fiction on. So talking about your characters, and Trudi, if we go back to what you were saying about how she was a young girl living in an isolated island community at that time. How difficult did you find it to leave a modern viewpoint, really, and get yourself into the mind of what will have been a very naive girl with very little world experience, despite the education that her father wanted her to have and all that? She had lived within very much her own community, and she suddenly is cast into this completely different situation and has to learn a bit more. Granted, it is also when she gets there, it's in their sort of contained world there, but they're bringing in influences. Fustro and Maria are bringing in influences from Italy, where they've lived before, and so she has to learn a lot about the outside world. And how did you get your head into that from a modern perspective, and maybe and talk a little about your thoughts about going home, that change?
Well, the thing is, she was probably the most advanced on the island because she has had, she could read and write, just Gaelic, but so she was kind of different from because she had had a father that had taught her who was from elsewhere. Now, that originally was a whole other subplot which was taken out, which was so hard to put the book back together after that disappeared. But she really had to have some knowledge of reading and writing, because if they'd just taken somebody from St Kilda at that time and put them into this other situation where she was supposed to read and write and stuff, it would have been just too much of a leap. But I'd say that was one of the most difficult parts of the book in terms of giving it a modern aspect, because a lot of the young adult readers now, they're very sassy, you know, and some of the young adult stuff actually scares me. So they are expecting a lot of that character. So I think, you know, from some of the feedback, they find Isabel too passive, she's too trusting. Why is she putting herself into this situation again? Why doesn't she say no? She can't say no. She's in an isolated situation where she doesn't have any power. So given that modern spin of the appealing character that the young adults wanted to buy into and be on her side, I think some of them felt that she just got what she deserved because she'd been just a wimp. But actually, Chicken House had really got me to that was her character ramped up. You know, they wanted her to be more assertive, to be more curious, not just to let things happen to her, but to be active, which I guess makes the book more interesting. So that was, you know, a good learning curve for me. But I would say probably that was the most difficult thing, was to give a modern view of how it might be that was appealing to the young adult audience, yet somewhat true to the times. So yeah, it was just difficult.
Yeah, can I just say, sorry, I totally sympathise and agree with that. I had the exact same thing with Alice in Witchbourne, where, yeah, you have to somehow tread a tightrope between being historically like faithful to how a character would have behaved, and then make them appealing to a modern audience and have them as sort of assertive. But yeah, totally.
I think the YA audience can be quite opinionated, but you know, which is not a bad thing at all. But I think also it does put you on the edge of, you know, I think as a writer, you need to be very true to yourself and to how you believe the story is, just with one ear on who you are writing it for, to keep them very much engaged. And I think it's about being faithful to your character as well, isn't it? While you're not sort of pandering totally to the modern era, particularly in historical fiction. It's a whole different thing, isn't it?
It is, and it's even things like the notion of love. So my editor, Kezia, she was very disturbed that I hadn't really, in the original manuscript that won the competition, there wasn't really any romance in there. I don't do romance, I'm not a romance person. And she just found it all a bit cold because Isabel had an arranged marriage, which is what would have happened at the time. And there wasn't really any spark between her and her betrothed, because she was just, that's what was going to happen to her. And I really had to kind of get into the character a little bit more, and it had to be adapted for modern times, which is, I had to give it a bit more, you know, more of a relationship aspect, which I found really, really tough to write. But actually, when I reread the book, it completely works, and it was very much the right thing to do because it needed it. But in terms of historical times, people didn't get married for love; they were put into marriages. So yeah, you just have to. It is different to what would have happened.
Yeah, it's that balance for a modern audience, isn't it? And what was. Nick, when you were talking about Tog, the daughter of the chieftain who comes from Britannia, and you talk about Cadmus and her, and you talk about this difference. There's quite an emphasis on the difference in size and strength. Yeah. Can you expand a little on that?
Yeah. Well, I mean, I guess I wanted so Cadmus is intellectually very strong whilst being physically very, very weak. And I sort of wanted, yeah, in a sort of obvious way, wanted a foil to that in the character of Tog. But I really wanted Tog to represent something that was sort of completely un-Roman. I find the idea of Britain to the Romans is something really, really fascinating, because for them, for the Romans, thinking about Britain was like the way we would think about sort of, I don't know, the middle of the Amazon rainforest or something, or more than that. You know, it's like when we think about Mars or something. Like, it was so far away and so alien and so weird. I sort of think a lot about what it must have felt like to be Caesar and to just arrive on the shores of Britain and to find this place which was completely carpeted in forest and full of these people who sort of painted themselves blue, and emerged from the shadows and engaged in these sort of guerrilla tactics. Like, it must have been completely terrifying. But it held this really sort of magical sway over Romans as the furthest it was possible to kind of get from civilization, and it was an island full of magic and monsters and things like that. So I sort of wanted Hog to be something that was, I guess she needed to fulfill two completely opposing functions, in the sense that I wanted her to be something that to Romans was completely alien, like the idea of a physically strong and sort of competent, in a kind of military sense, a woman who was, or a girl who was essentially able to fight, and who was physically very strong and embodied all of those kind of male qualities which the Romans prized. She is sort of the Romans' kind of worst nightmare, basically. So I needed her to be completely alien and weird from a Roman point of view, but also someone from whom Cadmus could sort of learn and realize that she wasn't as monstrous as he had been led to believe, and that people weren't as monstrous and alien as he'd been led to believe. So I guess it's the idea of presenting her as an alien, and then having him come to accept her alienness.
So the nice relationship develops there, and yes, the balance between his intellectual skills and her sort of physical abilities is quite an interesting.
And he has his sort of Bear Grylls moment when he goes to Britain at the end of the book and learns how to kind of make a fire and hunt for his dinner. And one of my favorite bits is when at the end of the book, when he's sailing back to Italy and he's sort of helping rig the ship, and he notices that like three hench he notices that he's got these sort of sinews in his forearms. He's sort of built up, and he's like quietly proud that he's actually, it's like he's been in the gym.
No, it's lovely. It's lovely to see characters develop through a story, and you feel that they have been on this journey, and they have changed, and they have become, something else. We're coming quite close to the end of our time here. There's so many other things I could ask you about. Nick, you have a completely different book coming out?
Yeah, I've got my first book for grown-ups. It's coming out on July 21st. It's called Alpha Omega, and it's a sort of dark, kind of near future sort of. I always tell myself I won't say it's like Black Mirror, but it is quite a lot like Black Mirror. Not that I was deliberately trying to ape that, but that's sort of how it turned out. But it's very strange. It's been existentially quite trying having to promote both books at the same time, because the stuff I write for children is kind of buoyant and hopeful and exciting, and then this this book I've got coming out for Titan is quite dark and has some quite unpleasant scenes in it, and it's quite difficult to find the sort of light in it. But it's quite, I mean, I think it's quite sort of funny. I hate calling it a satire, but I guess it has sort of satirical elements. Like it's sort of distorted and an exaggerated view of the future. But yeah, it's quite strange that I sort of obviously have two quite conflicting impulses in terms of writing children's books and books for adults, because they're completely different.
No, I don't think. I think as a writer, you write where it takes you. What do you think about that, Trudi? Do you think writing is it about the idea, or?
Yeah, definitely, because I didn't write The Pure Heart for children. I didn't write it for any audience in mind. I just wrote a story, and then I entered it into the competition, and then I was really surprised that I'd won. And that's really why I had to try and then get to grips with a young adult audience, because I hadn't had them in mind when I had written the book. And I'm not a planner, so I just kind of start with a situation and then just let it develop, and then I get myself into all kinds of tangles and twists and wish that I had planned it. But I have started on something else, and I haven't decided what audience it's for again, so it may or may not be. But I started with on the advice of my agent to have a plan, which I submitted the plan. They said, that's great. Within 2 chapters, I was off the plan. And I said, I'm not doing that plan anymore. So that's not how I work, but it is nice to have some kind of knowing where you're going. But whether or not my next book will be young adult, I still feel a little bit that I haven't got enough, almost not enough confidence to write for young adult, because it's so diverse. Whether it will be young adult or whether it will not be, I really don't know yet.
I think as a writer, I think you write best if you follow the idea and see where it is. I always feel that classifications are fine, but perhaps that's for a later stage. But you never know where it's going to take you, and I think that's the exciting thing about what we do, isn't it? It's what keeps us going and exploring and trying a new one. I would love to keep talking to you both, because it's been absolutely fascinating, but we are kind of coming to the end of our time. I'd like to thank Cymera 2020 for offering me this opportunity to have a fascinating discussion with you both. I'd like to thank Tweedie and Nick Bowling for such an amazing event, and I wish you both very well in your next book, and everybody. Oops, yeah, I thought it was upside down. I love the covers, by the way, they're gorgeous, both of them. So go out and buy their books, because they are amazing reads and they're fascinating. And once you get started, you won't want to stop. You want to escape into these heroic tales in past times. So thank you both very much. Thank you.
Thank you very much.